Press for start recording, and confirmation of that will be shown when the meeting starts to record. I have confirmation that the meeting is recording, so I'll now take this adherent for the meeting of the Executive Committee of the 1st of December 2021. Councillor Allison, I see that you're here. Councillor Anderson is also here. Councillor Bradley is here. Councillor Brown is here, as is Councillor Chalmers, Councillor Convery, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Corbett. Councillor Craig is here. Councillor Devlin, Councillor Dorman, Councillor Fagan and Councillor Faulkner are also here. Councillor Hamilton is here. Councillor Horsham is here, as is Councillor Logan. Councillor Loudon is here. I have apologies from Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Horn, I understand that you are substituting for Councillor MacDonald. Can you just confirm that you are present at the meeting and substituting? Thank you. I'll come back to Councillor Horn in a second, but I do believe that he is in attendance at the meeting today. Councillor McAdams is at the meeting. Councillor McCreary, Councillor McGuigan is here, as is Councillor Miller, Councillor Nealon and Councillor Nelson. Councillor Ross is at the meeting. Councillor Shearer.
Present. Pauline.
Councillor Wardhaw.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson is also here. Can I just double check with Councillor Horn that he is at the meeting? Okay, we'll leave it at that and I'll come back and check later. With that, Chair, I'll pass back to you for today's business.
Thanks very much, Pauline. We'll start with declarations of interest. Do we have any? I don't see any hands raised, so we'll move on to item 2, which is minutes of the previous meeting. Does any colleague have anything to say on the previous minutes? No, we'll move the minutes as a correct record.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Move on to item 3, which is revenue budget monitoring for period 7, pages 15 to 26, and I would ask Paul to give us a report on this, please. Thanks, Paul.
The picture on the revenue budget to the 8th of October 2021. And you can see at the foot of the first page, it makes reference to the fact that there's an overspend of £146,000. And that assumes that all of our COVID spend is going to be funded by the COVID funding that we've received and that we go on to talk about later in the paper. There are a couple of points mentioned specifically in here. One's around early years expansion, and there's a point made around a forecast underspend in terms of that budget at the moment. The reasons are given at 4.3, and at the end of paragraph 4.3, there's a reference to a potential carry forward in reserves of 2 reserves of £1.2 million in order to meet early years commitments in future years. There's also a reference to utilities price increases. Now, this was mentioned in the paper that went to the last meeting, and there was a question asked about the extent to which we had a locked-in price for gas and electricity. So you can see there, as it says, midway through paragraph 4.4, as at the end of September, 100% of the council's electricity and gas had been bought for the current year, and for next year the amount purchased to the end of September was 86% for electricity and 83% for gas. Now, prior to the meeting, there was a question asked about the extent to which consumption has increased and how this deals with increased consumption. So information that I've got, particularly for schools, in terms of consumption, shows that for primary and secondary schools, from April to the end of September, there's been an increase in the consumption of electricity to the order of 5% and 27% for gas. Now that's in comparison to 2019-20, which is the last, if I can call it, normal year that we've had, that we can measure that consumption against. Now, what we do anticipate is that the increase in consumption has got the potential to grow as we go through the winter months, and we'll continue to monitor that. Now, that increased consumption and the spend related to that is catered for in our projection of the outturn spend to the end of the year. So the paper then starts to look at that, and it makes the point in section 5.1 around the level of funding that we've received towards COVID costs, right? And that sits at just over £59.6 million. 27.5 of that is for specific purposes, and that leaves £32.25 million to meet other COVID cost pressures. Again, just in the way that we have done throughout this year, we give an update on the position in terms of our projected spend on COVID costs to the end of year 2021-22, and that sits at £18.649 million. The point I would make, though, is that there are costs which will carry on into year 2022-23, and at this point, I have no idea of any further COVID funding coming from the government. The paper then looks at social care costs, and these are dealt with differently in the costs of social work services as they relate to the pandemic are picked up through something called the mobilisation plan, which has got a relationship into the NHS. Social care costs being charged to that mobilisation plan are covered at sections 5.6 through to 5.9. So you can see the picture there in relation to care at home. There's also a figure given at the end of 5.6 about the full year estimate of those costs. And again, that's something that we need to think about as we move into year 2022-23. And again, on that note, at 5.8, a point's made around notification from the government. And again, we reported this to the last committee of an amount of £300 million nationally in relation to health and social care funding. And again, as we updated at the last committee, there is a commitment to present to the next IGB board meeting an update on that recurring funding, an estimate of the remaining financial pressures for 2022-23, and any requirement to bridge any gap in those in that funding and expenditure. So just going back to the recommendations, I ask for noting of that position and of the various positions around COVID grant funding and expenditure, and happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. I see that Councillor Craig has his hand up. Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just the utilities price increases. Obviously, that's part of good housekeeping and good accounting, but a lot of this stuff often goes uncommented on. And I'm sure maybe Paul could give us a figure later on about just how much that's saved the council overall, because there has been in the past the odd mention of why we're paying extra money to have that secured. So it would be nice to know just how much the council had saved by doing that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm sure that we could arrive at a figure there, Paul, to be circulated at some time.
Chair, to be honest with you, I need to go back and have a look, right, at what premise we would work from, right? But I'll see what can be done. What we do have through Procurement Scotland is a national arrangement through which gas and electricity are bought per the arrangement that's described in that paper. And I might need to go back and touch base with them just to see if they've got an idea, because that's obviously in their interest to try and record that, and we could maybe work something out for the council. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Paul. Robert?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I wanted to ask at 5.7 about the adults and older people's services and the pressures that there are there. I mean, this is both a question about unmet need in care homes, I suppose, within and without the council, delays in the hospital, and also, I suppose, changes in demand. And I wonder if you can give us a bit more flavour of that in terms of just what the trends are and what the ability to meet staffing needs is as well. Thank you.
Paul?
In terms of the figures that are there, obviously, what the paper goes through is in relation to unmet need, right, and the figures that have been identified to sit within that mobilisation plan. I think the information that Councillor Brown's looking for is more of a flavour around the current position, right, between hospitals and the care service. I would probably need to defer to social work resources to give the most up-to-date picture on that.
Is Suman there?
Yes, thank you. In relation
Thanks,
to the
Suman.
no, not at all. So, in relation to the question, said that some of those were covered when we had the briefing session for members with the Chief Executive of the Health Board, myself and other colleagues the previous weeks. So, I'm happy to kind of cover some of that again. In terms of the financial position as respect to this paper, the area I would focus on is in respect of care at home, because that's really the primary area that we're looking to build our capacity in terms of ensuring flow to the entirety of our health and social care system. So it's the key thing to kind of note is that we've had an ongoing process of recruitment to the council. The part-year cost of the additional recruitment target for this year was originally estimated to be about 1.9 million for the period from now until March 2022. This cost of 1.9 million in 21-22 would be offset by monies within the IGB reserves for doing that. Although recruitment has been actually progressed, the original target increase is unlikely to be met because of just demand in terms of limitation within the available workforce. It's also an area of note for us that we are conscious that of the importance of building and growing the workforce, because often when we go out to recruitment, essentially we take staff away in many cases from independent providers, and likewise when they go to recruitment they take staff away from us. So that's why the supply bank that the council has put in place is so important, and also what that we're doing with further and higher education bodies in terms of increasing pipeline of staff into our services. What I would say is that we've got a target increase in additional 4,000 hours per week that we're looking to work towards. The full year recurring cost of that recruitment from April 22 into next, in other words, for next year would be appropriately 3.8 million. So we'd be looking at addressing that through normal turnover and existing vacancies in terms of managing some of that cost, but inevitably it would be a pressure that we continue to need to manage. That being said, as Paul's mentioned, there's been an additional allocation from Scottish Government of 300 million. That's not solely for care at home, that's for a range of different activities, and there are budget lines associated with that. And we're going through the process at the moment, as Paul has identified, of seeing what proportion of that needs to offset existing commitments that the council has made in relation to that workforce, as well as additional recruitment that we can accelerate on the basis that we need to improve performance across the piece. In terms of the overall performance, in terms of our health and social care system, it's fair to say that the whole system is running hot. The demands on our care at home service is certainly split 50-50 from community pressures as well as enabling discharges from our hospitals. When we talk about delays, it's also important to note that delays are probably come about 3-4% of the actual number of people who are discharged from hospitals. There's a whole body of work that goes on behind the scenes. We are looking at a range of immediate actions that we're playing through, as well as that more short-term set of activities, most notably being a Home First team that we are standing up within our localities this week to trial improving the throughput through our system and reduce admission to hospitals as far as possible, as well as ensuring that we get people out in a swift fashion. Happy to kind of provide more detailed information to Councillor Brown directly, because I'm very conscious that this ends up being a distraction from actually the body of what this item is about. But we've provided information to the IGB, and again, as always, I'm very happy to circulate that information more widely to all councillors. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, and thanks, Suman, for that explanation. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. It's actually maybe a wee bit of a follow-on from Peter's question and Paul's answer. Obviously that we have a contract here, it's a national contract, and presumably that the tariff is actually set up on a prepaid basis, i.e. and an agreement has been made. But I'm just wondering, is there a minimum usage within that contract for that tariff, which would then mean that if we don't attain that usage element, then the tariff may actually be different, i.e. increased, in order that the supply company are actually still getting a similar amount of income, and that thereby that they're not going to lose out on it, and that we're not going to gain out of it. So I was just wondering if there is that sort of element within the contract, Paul.
Oh,
Okay. So the arrangement that we've got has been run through Procurement Scotland, and I want to say it's back probably at the beginning of the last decade, right? And that actually grew out of an arrangement that Scotland Excel had, which was about forward purchasing energy, right? So it was about going out to the market and taking future prices. So you can see the benefit of that, right? And we've managed to lock that in for this year and for a good part of next year across a period where we've had, pretty horrible increases in gas and electricity prices. Across that period of time, right, I don't think I've ever had a situation where Procurement Scotland have come back and said, look, you are as a group of authorities and public bodies, you're not consuming to the extent which we thought you were going to, and we're going to have to pass an increase in price. So the situation's never arisen, right? I can check, Councillor McGuigan, to see if there is some kind of clause in the contract around that. But across that period of time, it's never arisen. I don't think it's going to arise this year, right? For the reason that we've described. Because of the ventilation requirements, right, that we've got in schools, we are having to consume more energy in order to keep things at a workable condition, right? So it's not going to happen this year. It hasn't happened in the past decade. But I'm happy just to go and see what the detail is around that. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Paul.
Thanks very much, Paul. Thank you very much.
Alan?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points. First, on the recruitment for the care at home. I mean, they're just in the same wages they've been before, but I notice in London and the South, the care at home workers are now classified as essential workers, similar to police and health workers. So they get benefits that and housing and various other things, and maybe we should be considering that. The other point I'd like to ask is, and I've raised it before about the IT mobile scheme, can Suman tell me that that's still working? Because I raised it. I've now been at community council meetings where it's been raised. I've now had fellow councillors phoning. We recruited 12 schedulers, and my understanding is the schedulers set out the schedule and then the team leaders can have to change it because the schedulers have no idea who to visit and who and where they should be. I just ask, is that system still working well? Can you guarantee it recording that it is working? As Ian Beattie continually tells me. Thank you.
Suman?
So 2 points in that one. Firstly, I'm happy to have a separate conversation because I'm conscious that's not really related to the agenda item that we're on. But in terms of your question, Councillor Faulkner, yes, the system is working. Having had a demonstration of it yesterday myself from the staff, I would highlight though, and this relates to this point about our staffing challenges at the moment, like any system of scheduling, it will be tested when we're working under extremis. We are struggling in terms of the level of demand placed in the system, in terms of requests for packages and available staff to provide it. So with the best will in the world, there's going to be times when we're going to struggle to necessarily provide the quality of service at the highest level that we would want. And that then, so that's not necessarily to do with the total mobile system at all. That's to do with the level of extremis in which our staff are operating, the available staff we have to provide those packages of care. But yes, I'm happy to provide assurance that the total mobile system is operational and continues to be rolled out across South Lanarkshire. Thank you.
Chair, through you, could I ask if myself and some other councillors could actually get a presentation or see it in working, as Suman has done?
Sorry, say that again, Alan.
Could I ask if myself and other councillors could actually be shown the system working, as Suman said he's seen yesterday?
Well, I think if Suman gives us details of it. Cleland, do you want to come in on that? I mean, I'm sure we had the briefing already. Cleland?
Yeah. All I was going to say, and for Councillor Faulkner's request, give us a wee bit of time to have a look at that because we can't show you the live system. There's personal data on it. So let's see if we can get a demo of the system without the data and maybe get that from the provider, and they can make some kind of arrangement to demonstrate the system. I have to say, that's an operational system. I'm not absolutely convinced what elected members are going to get from a demo of an IT system without data. I think the core issue that Councillor Faulkner's looking for, I'm sorry to put words in your mouth, Alan, is the overall system working effectively in terms of the provision of service. And I think Suman's point is at this juncture where we've got staff challenges in terms of availability, huge demand, etc. It's never going to run the way it would in a normal steady state. But can we ask Chair just for a wee bit of time to go and look at what we can put in front of members so that we don't have personal data on a live system being presented to elected members? Thanks.
Thanks very much. I'm sure that's agreeable with you, Alan. Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. I see that, Suman, you've still got your hand up. Is that Legacy? And
sorry, Chair, that's Legacy. Sorry, Legacy. I was going to make the same point that Clella was mentioning, so apologies, that's Legacy.
Okay, no, that's fine. I don't see any other hands raised, so I'm going to move recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 4, which is the capital programme for period 7, pages 27 to 36. And I would ask Paul to come back in on this, please. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. The paper, again, this is taking us up to the beginning of October. What the adjustments that are in Appendix 1 ask for in terms of approval would move the programme to a level of £78.3 million. This is for the General Services Programme, first of all, and that's a £5.16 million reduction in the programme. And that does include the impact of slippage in a number of projects due to market conditions. And this comes back to a point we've talked about previously relating to availability of resources and price increases. So the second page of the paper puts a figure in that, in terms of that 5 million, at just under £2.3 million of that being due specifically to those market conditions. So the period 7 position is given there in terms of what we've spent to date against what we would have expected to spend. We've also got details of the housing programme, which is in at a level of £79 and £2/3 million. And again, the period 7 picture's given for that. So in terms of the recommendations within the paper, it looks for noting of the position, and it looks for approval as well for those adjustments to the capital programme that I mentioned. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Paul. Robert, I see your hands up.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Really just echo a couple of points discussed at the leaders' meeting. First of all, about the Stewartfield Way one, on which there is obviously a delay because of the design problems. Have we had sort of likely timescale for when we might get the further presentation of the more developed project there? And then secondly, and maybe I'm taking a bit of a liberty on this one, the CO2 monitoring raises the issue of the new arrangements for fire alarms and all that. Do we have resource within our budget to make sure the council houses are dealt with in terms of the requirements by February 22? And will it be met? Will it be done by then? Are there any issues to do with the timescale of the installation of that, which I assume is a capital programme in some regard?
Thanks. I'm sure these questions were answered, Robert, but I'll get Paul to come back in on that. Paul?
Okay, listen, I'll just deal with the CO2 monitors. That's actually picked up in the succeeding paper, right, which talks about additional money coming from the government, and that's about air quality monitoring in schools, right, which I believe is distinct, right, but I'm by no means expert in this, from the requirements from February next year, and I'll maybe see if somebody from housing can come in on that. The issue about Stewartfield Way, I'd probably need to defer to Michael.
Yep.
Getting an update.
Right, I see Michael hands up. Michael.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to advise the timescale, we're looking to come back to members. We gave a commitment to give an awareness session before returning back to committee. As you'll see from the report, we think it's prudent to undertake some additional traffic counts. There are issues about sourcing consultants and design, but to answer the question, is we hope to come back the first quarter of 2022 with our members awareness session. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Michael. And Danny?
Thanks, Chair. So it was just to respond to Councillor Brown's point there, just about fire alarms. So Paul was right in terms of the CO2 monitors is to do with ventilation requirements in schools, just over the period to deal with the spread of COVID. But in terms of the fire alarms, then there's Councillor Brown's right, there's a requirement to have interlinked fire alarms in homes by February 2022. And what I can confirm here is that our projections currently stand that we'll have 21,000 houses completed out of our 25,000 stock. So that's 84% by the 1st of February. The remaining 4,000 houses, Councillor Brown, are likely to be outstanding as a result of no accesses. And it's our intention to go back early in the new year. So we're looking to go back in then beginning January 2022 and make attempts to go back into the houses that have been no accesses. So that'll be a wee push on the ones that have been at the door but haven't been able to get back in. So we're pretty confident that we will be there or thereabouts in terms of our requirements by the February delivery date. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Chair. That's helpful on both counts.
Yeah, thanks very much, Danny. That is really helpful. Lindsay, see your hands up.
Thanks, Chair. I actually was going to ask a question on the CO2 monitoring in schools, if that's all right. I was just wondering, it says this will ensure each establishment has access to CO2 monitoring. So I was just wondering if there's a wee bit more information on that and how much equipment the schools will have and how much they have just now, and if this will bring it up to an acceptable level once this funding's been implemented.
Okay, thanks, Danny.
Yep, thanks, Chair. So since last year anyway, we've been monitoring CO2 levels in schools, so it's been a piece of work that we've been ongoing with. But on the 3rd of August this year, the government issued guidance on reducing the risk in relation to COVID-19 in schools, and Section 73 that related to ventilation, Councillor Hamilton, and that required schools to have access to CO2 monitors, which is what this funding refers to. So what we've done across that is in terms of the secondary school estate then, Inspire Ed, who's our PPP contractor, so they've checked the 1,300 teaching spaces across the secondary estate. So we had a timeline there to do checks in every teaching area between the schools going back in August and the October school break. We did that in the secondary schools, and what that showed is out of the 1,300 teaching spaces that we needed further checks in 60 of those, which is 4.6%, so a really low level. Which the team are working their way through. And in terms of the primary schools and ASN establishments, so we've coordinated the delivery. So we took delivery of 300 CO2 monitors and we've spread them across the 150 establishments. And there was 1,410 teaching spaces across the primary school estate. And from our checks that we took place across all of them, there was only 13 spaces, so 0.9%, so very, very low, which are highlighted as needing reassessed as well. And I think that probably all just reflects the investment we've made in our schools over the period as well. So we've got a really modern school estate, and that's all helped in terms of meeting the standards. So we've been going through assessing, why some have went above the levels, and that can be due to spikes during the day, which sends a reminder to open windows further or whatever. And it can also just be as a result of some corrupt data. So we're going back in just to double check and to monitor, but we think there's very, very minimum investment that we might require to make sure that everything complies with the standard it's going to be. And what we're going to do now is, so we're satisfied that we everything's in place it needs to be, and going forward then between now and next summer, we'll continue to monitor CO2 levels in the teaching areas. So what we'll do is we'll look at a minimum of one class in every establishment for a period of a week between now and next summer, and we'll do that in coordination and in consultation with the senior management team within the schools as well, to make sure they're satisfied. And all the way through, when we've been dealing with this and dealing with ventilation in schools, we've been engaging with the trade unions as well to make sure that everybody's satisfied with what we're doing, everybody's aware of what we're doing. So that hopefully that gives you a wee bit more background in relation to CO2 monitoring, and it satisfies you as well about the good health, I suppose, of our school estate in relation to ventilation.
Are you okay with that, Lindsay? That's a fairly decent report.
Yeah, thanks. That's very useful. Thanks, Danny.
Okay, thanks very much. Don't see any other hands raised, so I'm going to move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Thanks very much. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thanks very much. We go on to item 5, additional funding from the Scottish Government and other external sources, pages 37 to 40. And I would ask Paul to come back in on this as well. Paul.
Thanks, Chair. So the amounts that you've got here are for the revenue and capital aspects of the money that has been provided by the Scottish Government in relation to carbon dioxide monitoring. So I'll just leave it there, I think. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. I don't see any hands raised in this item, so I'm going to move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thanks very much. We go on to item 6, which is workforce monitoring information. April to September 21, pages 41 to 64. And would ask Kay to give us a report on this, please. Kay.
Thank you, Chair. This is our 6-monthly summary, and as you say, covering the period April to September. So in terms of the content of the report, as you can see, our absence, we've got an average of 4.8% over the period. That's just reflecting the increase that we've been reporting through the various committees over the past 6 months. At section 5, you can see the support that we put in place to help the workforce, and you can see an increase in terms of occupational health activity to support helping employees return to work. At section 6, in terms of health and safety, we're reporting an increase, particularly in relation to minor accidents and incidents, but I would also point out that we're comparing with a period of lockdown from last year, so that is entirely as expected. At section 8, we take you through our learning and development, and you'll see from the figures there that we're demonstrating a large increase in terms of self-directed learning, with a lot of our workforce participating in the Learn Online. But you'll see we're still managing to do some in-person activity on learning development too. At section 9, we can see, again, as we've been reporting over the past 6 months, that increase in turnover. I would reassure members it's still generally low in comparison with most organisations, but we are beginning to see a bit of an increase coming through there, so we are keeping a very close eye on that. And at section 10, you can see the recruitment activity that we've had over the period. And of those appointed, you can see 41 were disabled candidates and 18 came from a Black or ethnic minority background. At section 11, you can also see an increase in terms of employee headcount, and that's predominantly schools-based or activity that we've had in order to support some of our COVID measures. I'm asking for the information contained in the report to be noted, and I'm happy to address any questions, Chair.
Thanks very much, Kay. I see Richard has his hand up. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Kay, yeah, just in point 7 under the disciplinary hearings, I note that your target is to convene disciplinary hearings within 6 weeks. I was just asking what support is in place for your staff members who don't meet that criteria that you've put out there, because behind every statistic is an actual person. So I'm just wondering what support we actually give to that person if we don't meet the hearing within 6 weeks. And you know, obviously, if you're sitting waiting a disciplinary, it's the discomfort that and the mental health issues that can cause at the same time.
Thanks, Richard. Kay.
Thank you, Chair. As you would anticipate, there is a kind of broad range of timescales involved in that overall statistics, and you're quite correct. Behind every statistic, there is a person. So at each point, the person who's affected will be offered support. So whether it's access through our employee support, access to counselling, etc. We do have also some pastoral arrangements in some of our resources as well. So there is support offered, and very, very aware of the potential impact on the individual, and indeed the fact-finding team are trained quite extensively in that in order to pick up on any clues in any of the contact they have with the individual. Thank you.
Thanks. Chair, can I just have a supplementary?
Yes.
But generally, when people are suspended from work or waiting a disciplinary, they would probably have no contact. I would be advised to have no contact with any other employees within the councils, which is very difficult for somebody who is sitting at home concerned about their job. So I find it sometimes is a bit difficult, and I'm just wondering if it's something as a council we should be looking at to make sure there is support. I appreciate there is, you can direct people, but I'm just wondering if there's do we have a confidential contact for somebody within the council? I'm just concerned that I know how it affects people, so I'm just making sure that we have the right processes and the right things in place for people who are waiting in disciplinary hearings.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I mean, there are I would reassure members there are a very small number of cases that would fall into that category, and as a result, they get a fair bit of attention from my own team. So there is regular contact. Perhaps in some circumstances where an employee has been suspended, they've been asked not to be in touch with anybody within their immediate work team, but there'll be support available through my own team. through confidential supporting helplines, but also if they're a trade union member, you'll find that the trade union also rally around and provide support to that individual.
Okay, Richard. Thank you very much. Alec? Alec, you're on mute. I'll cut.
Sorry, no, I use this. Somebody must have muted the computer. I didn't realise. A couple of points I was wanting to raise, Kay. First is the analysis of counselling referrals by cause. I noticed that the work stress has risen from 6 to 58, about 1,000%, yet the other areas, if it's COVID related, have not had the same level of increase. Can you put that into some kind of perspective as to why that has happened? That's on page 54. On page 63, when it's looking at interviews, etc., we have had a significant number of the armed forces applying, about half of which have been interviewed, yet none have been appointed. I cannot believe that members of our armed forces are not sufficiently well, of these 34, I think it is, that none of them have been able to get a post within South Lanarkshire. I'm just hoping that when we are interviewing people, we are giving them sufficient grace, and that we will be trying to rectify what I see as a significant problem there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the first part of the question there, which was about the analysis of counselling by cause, obviously there is an increase in comparison with this point in time last year. But kind of, as I said during the presentation there, you're also referring back to a period of time where perhaps a lot of the workforce were not present. So there was a bit of a lockdown period there. So in terms of an explanation, I think that really would explain why those figures appear to have jumped so highly in comparison. In terms of the armed forces, because the numbers are quite small, it's difficult to draw general inferences from what we have at this point in time, but we are looking very carefully at the reasons why individuals are rejected and getting a little bit of feedback from our recruitment team on that now. If there are elements that we can bring through perhaps to assist some of our armed forces applicants, we'll certainly get that fed back. Thank you, Chair.
Just supplementary, John. Kay, then the change in the work stress figures, how does April to September 21 compare to April to September 19? Is that in line with that, or has there been a significant rise from then as well?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think I can go back and have a look at those particular figures, but off the top of my head, I think it's much of a muchness in comparison with a year that is a bit more comparative rather than last year, which was very different.
Thanks very much. Can I ask Kate to come back to you with those figures when she has them?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Gladys?
Yeah, Kay actually stole my thunder a wee bit and beat me to it, but it was just in answer to Councillor Nelson's question in terms of disciplinaries. As the chair of the disciplinary appeals panel, the information is very, very detailed, and I'm sure any of my colleagues that have very kindly volunteered to sit in a panel and the deputies of Finance and Corporate will. It's very detailed. The only time there can be delays, it's just meeting the employees' calendar dates and getting together with their trade unionists. And sometimes that can be a bit difficult, but personnel are always very, very flexible. So it's just to give assurances that, it is a really concerning time for people going through that process, but judging by the paperwork, you can see the amount of support that's offered to them and from their own trade union.
Thanks, Gladys. Poppy? Not hearing you, Poppy. Are you on mute? I'll leave Poppy just now and come back to Poppy. Jerry?
Thanks, Chair. Kay, if Kay could answer this for me. In 7.1K, 47 disciplinary hearings were held across the resorts. It represents an increase of 30 for April to September 2020. Now, if I'm reading this right, we were in lockdown for the period where there's been a massive increase in disciplinaries. Yet there was hardly anybody in their work. They were all working from home. Could we have an explanation as to why there's been going from 17 disciplinary hearings up to 47? Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Kay?
Thank you, Chair. It's exactly the same explanation that there is round about some of the other aspects of this paper. So you've got a period of lockdown when we were not undertaking activity. So there was a kind of very pragmatic approach taken over the lockdown period, and if things could be dealt with in a slightly different way than they were, or alternatively, there was a bit of a delay. So that's why there's relatively few disciplinaries last year in comparison with a number this year. And I'll take a note of a couple of these areas just so that we can provide the previous year, perhaps as an explanation for members. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, could I have a supplementary to that?
Yes.
Because a disciplinary arises at a certain point in time. You can't say because we were in lockdown, we were peeled them all back in the bains. A disciplinary is a disciplinary. So it would be helpful, Kay, if we give a fuller explanation, because that just doesn't look right and doesn't sit right with me. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think Kay meant that, but I think it'd be better if we got an explanation for you, Jerry. Okay, we'll do that. Okay with that.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you.
Poppy, are you with us now?
I think, Chair, she's having IT problems. She's not on mute.
Right, I'll leave it to later on. I'll take Monique first, and then we'll come back to Poppy. Okay.
Thanks, Chair. It was to do with page 67, and it was Appendix 15. When I looked at the figures to do with the Black and minority ethnic applicants, it doesn't look so great, even though we've done a lot of work with the equity group. And it was just to say that I hope that these figures weren't reflective of how it's going to be going forward, because it looks as if we're in a worse situation rather than a better situation. So it was just to say that I would look forward to the next 6 months worth of figures. And I just wanted to ask something, Chair. See, when the next 6 months worth of figures come out, will they be split into, like, say, 6 months or like 3 months gaps, so that we would be able to see, because it might mean that it is actually looking better than what it is. Whereas if it's just like lumped in together, it might be that at certain times of the year, then there was a better response rate. And, you know, because I just think if we do it, if it's just a 1 year figure, it might not actually be truly reflective of how it's actually like working, because it might look worse at some times and actually better at others. So it's so that we could actually have what I would think of as a proper representation. So I just wanted to ask if that would be possible, please.
Yeah, we do receive periodic reports and an end of year report, but I'll hand over to Kay there. Kay.
Thank you, Chair. I was about to say exactly the same thing. We do have the council-wide workforce monitoring papers that come regularly to committee as well, so you'll be able to see that periodic placing.
Subsequent, Chair. I know that, Kay. Thank you very much. I'm talking about it coming to the executive. Thank you.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You have resource committees and at the executive on these periods, Monique. So you've got a chance to see it at various different places throughout the year. So you have a more detailed picture overall of each of the resources, as well as an overall pattern that comes to the executive.
Chair, I understand that.
How much more you want?
That's fine, because that's that committee and that's what happens on that day. This is this committee and this is what happens on this day. What I was asking was if we could actually have that reflection, which is at that committee, that would then be reflected in the executive. But if you don't want it, then that's totally fine. I just thought it would actually be of benefit. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks very much, Monique. Has Poppy come back in? I see her hands went down now.
Chair, I'm happy to ask the question for Councillor Corbett.
Right,
She did put
okay,
it in the
Richard.
chat, so I know what the question is. It was round about in page 41 about this council absence rates at 4.8% and how we compare to other local councils. Do we get figures of other local councils, and could we see that in the paper of where we sit within the other local councils? I would imagine that'll be shared somewhere, but I was just looking to, well, Poppy was looking to see if that can be shared possibly at your next monitoring, if we could see something, how we compare to other local councils.
Thanks. Kay, can we accommodate that?
Thank you, Chair. Actually, the comparative element that you're looking for is it's very dated. So the councils do share that information. It's part of the performance management reporting that comes back to the council, letting members know where we are within the overall pecking order. The data is not shared on a real-time basis, unfortunately, so it wouldn't be possible to make as part of this report, for example, at 6 months, how are we comparing with the other authorities in Scotland. We won't know that until much later on next year. So apologies, I don't have that information.
I think any information that would show that, Kay, whether it's kind of outdated or something just to bring back and show us that, we would appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do that, Richard. Okay, Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Just to make the point and maybe give a wee bit of comfort to Councillor Nelson, the information, right, albeit given the limitations Kay's described, does get caught up within the local government benchmark framework information, which gets reported to the Performance and Review Scrutiny Forum. So the data is there through that route, and again, we can pick that up and highlight that moving forward as well. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Paul. I don't see any other hands raised here, so I'm going to move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Thanks very much. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thanks very much. We now move on to an item for decision, item 7, which is the International Children's Games, pages 65 to 68. And I would ask Michael to come in on this item, please. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. So, members, the purpose of this report is to allow the committee to consider an invitation to participate in the 2022 International Children's Games, and also just to highlight the potential financial implications. So members may recall that the Council has sent a delegation to various International Children's Games since 2000, and the Council has also joined forces with North Lanarkshire Council to form Team Lanarkshire back in 2011, when we jointly hosted the Games, but also prior to that in 2008 to 2010. So the invitation has been received, and this will be the 54th International Children's Game, and it will be held in Coventry from the 11th to the 16th of August 2022. It's anticipated that the delegation we would send would be a maximum of 24, including the children taking part in the sports, also support teams, and also a delegation from the Council. In terms of financial implications, it is estimated that this would be in the region of 19,000. However, through sponsorship and other support, we anticipate that being in the region of 12,000. So with that, Chair, I would ask members to consider the recommendations in 2.1 and hopefully approve the recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that report, Michael. I think it's a really worthwhile idea. However, open it up to members and colleagues to comment. I see Robert has his hand up. Robert.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Just wanted to say, amidst all the gloom, this is a really nice, well worthwhile project, as you've touched on, and we've been involved with the thing before. I think it gives us a great opportunity, if you like, to stress the advantages of outdoor activity, athletics, all that sort of thing, against the background of the COVID gloom that surrounds us. And I think it's a hugely worthwhile thing with a fair bit of good publicity stuff for the council as well, I think.
Thanks, Robert. Alec?
Yeah, just literally what Robert was saying. It is, pardon the phrase, a good news story here, and being able to compete in it. I on the financial side, it doesn't seem to be an excessive budget, and I did note that Michael was using the words estimate, so I wouldn't like us to be fixed on that 12,000. I think it's more important that we have the contribution to these games rather than having to, in the end, restrict anything on a narrow financial basis. So I'd like to see the Chief Executive with the power, providing he's no adding a nothing on the end of the figure, to make sure that this is managed. Just for your information, I found out last night the reason that it's 18 is because that is a number that Coventry have asked for from each delegation, because they've decided to major on the number of cities that are involved in it, and they're restricted in the number of people that they can host. So that was, because that was a question that was asked on Monday, Cleland. But very welcome it, and within reason, give them the opportunity if further funding is required to go ahead.
Thanks, Alec. Jerry, I see your hands up.
Yeah, very, very quickly, Chair. Concur with everything. I was at the initial one when it started off. It's a great news story for the council. It's good for South Lanarkshire, and it's good for the kids that participate. So it's a no-brainer. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Jerry. I'm not seeing any other hands raised, so I'm going to move the recommendation.
I'll second, Chair.
Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thanks very much. That leaves us one other item, which is an item for noting on memberships. I was going to take the recommendation, but I see Alex gets hand raised. Alec? You're muted, Alec.
Sorry. Apologies, I don't have my hand up.
Right, okay. It's an item for noting, folks. Can we accept the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thanks very much. Okay, listen, thanks very much for everybody turning up. As this is the last meeting before Christmas, I hope everyone has a very peaceful and enjoyable Christmas. Hopefully the new COVID won't spoil that for everybody. But as I say, thanks very much for turning up today. Many thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.